Today I'm in Chicago and I'm taking some trains that I usually don't take. I was just on the North Central service and now I'm going to go out to the West Side. I give so much attention to the North Side, but the West Side, way too easy to overlook, and we're going to correct that today. I'm going to head out to the end of the Green Line at Harlem, back here to one of these stations where it intersects with the Pink Line, and then we'll do the same with the Pink Line in a separate video. Then later on today, there's another Metro treat for you, if I didn't already put out that video. And then, of course, the Amtrak video on the Lakeshore Limited to Cleveland, they already watched, so stick around. Let's take some lines that we don't know that much about and don't have a lot of time on. The Green Line contains the oldest elevated lines in the city of Chicago. The South Side Elevated was completed in 1892, and the Lake Street Elevated, the section we're riding today, opened by the end of 1893. At the time, the city of Chicago didn't own its mass transit lines. The various lines were built by privately held companies under franchise rights granted by the cities they served. Initially, this was just Chicago, but as the lines expanded into the villages on the city's fringes, those towns would offer franchises as well. This was several decades before vehicle ownership was widespread, but population was rapidly growing across Chicagoland. Here, the city's central location on the continent had attracted people to make a living and grow their families working to process the various commodities that converged on Chicago via the Transcontinental Railroad network. Businessmen saw the opportunity to profit off the need for citizens to move about the city. The growing population was straining the city's reliance on horse-driven means of conveyance, and there was a demand to modernize the city's image as the 20th century approached. Electricity was the technology of the day that appeared to offer the greatest chances of improving the mobility of citizens and the profitability of transit lines. Electric street railways were their own network across the city, but mass transit bridged a gap between neighborhoods and downtown Chicago in a meaningful way that attracted investors. Initially, the Lake Street Elevated line received its charter in 1888. Michael Cassius McDonald bankrolled various illegal gambling operations in the city and was the chief investor in the construction of the Lake Branch. Initially, the line was chartered to run between Madison and Market Station in downtown to California Station on the west side. The line was built as an elevated track on steel support structures over Lake Street after crossing the Chicago River downtown. This was prior to the loop's construction, so the initial downtown terminal was on Market Street, the present site of today's Wacker Drive. The opening day of the line was quite the spectacle. 50,000 people rode on the first day, much as new line openings garner in today's age. And the line averaged more than 30,000 passengers per day, proving its viability to get citizens from the sprawl of West Side neighborhoods to downtown. Within months of its opening, the line was completed to Laramie Avenue, with many more station stops than the line presently has today. Despite the popularity of the line, its fares didn't cover the construction costs, and the line was considered cash poor. Enter Charles Tyson Yerkes, an East Coast transplant to Chicago whose fortunes made in New York transit had been spread across an electric street railway empire in Chicago that could benefit from the Lake Street Elevated. His interest in buying the struggling Lake Branch was to minimize the losses to his trolley operations caused by the competition of the Metropolitan Elevated line, which ran south of the Lake Branch as well as north to the city's north side via what today is partially the Paulina Connector and Northwest Elevated lines, the pink and blue lines respectively. Yerkes negotiated with the townships of Cicero and Oak Park to extend the Lake Branch to their villages in the hopes of driving population growth and profitability of the traction lines he owned. Yerkes was eventually successful in extending the line and creating several branch lines that would connect to his trolley lines on the west side. But his reputation as an outsider, combined with public outcry against the use of the line to drive riders from the loop out to the Harlem racetrack, ended up being his undoing. Gambling was seen as an immoral vice, despite the initial money for the Lake Branch Line's creation coming substantially from it. The express running trains to the racetrack that ran through what were then less dense communities on the edge of the metropolitan area were cause for the cities of Cicero and Oak Park to shut down branch operations on the Lake Street line a few years after the turn of the century. This left the Lake Street Elevated as a still important local link for daily commutes across the city's west side. Over the span of the first years of Yerkes' ownership of the Lake Branch, he had built the loop downtown, but at the cost of nearly all his political capital in the city, leading to his lines being placed in receivership during the first decade of the 1900s. The line would be operated under the ownership of the Chicago and Oak Park Elevated until 1924, when the Chicago Rapid Transit Company merged the city's various elevated companies into one privately held corporation. That company would eventually fold into city ownership in the post-World War II era as the CTA, the Chicago Transit Authority. Though it and the Lake Street Elevated would not resemble the line we're riding today until the early 1960s. Prior to then, the elevated line became an at-grade route running parallel to South Boulevard after Laramie Station. This created traffic bottlenecks in the city's far west side and suburb of Oak Park. The CTA alleviated this through a massive project to relocate the line along with public utilities, eliminating the at-grade crossings and connecting the elevated to a disused part of the neighboring embankment owned and operated by the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad for its regional commuter trains. This created the layout we see on our ride today, where the Lake Street Elevated's far western terminus begins its run to the loop on the edge of Metra's UP West Line, which runs from Elburn to Ogilvie Transportation Center in a video that I previously posted. The current terminus of Harlem and Lake was created in the early 60s, replacing the entrenched former terminus of the line at Forest Park. The realignment of the line provided for the former trackage west of the station to be filled in and the Harlem yard to be built so that train sets could be stored at the end of the line rather than taking up space on what was then third track sections further down the line. The 5000 series trains built in the 2010s by Bombardier are the norm on the Green Line. This train will be going out of service, so we'll be switching to a train on the other side of the platform shortly. The combination of Metra bi-level trains on the UP West Line right next to the L Line makes for some great sights as we await the departure of our inbound train. Metra's Oak Park station on the old Chicago Northwestern line is the faster way to downtown at a slightly higher fare. Prior to taking this Green Line train from Harlem, I'd only been in this part of the west side while aboard Metra's UP West Line. We'll be facing north for this trip to Ashland station, as switching seats between sides during the ride would definitely make me stand out, and I prefer to keep a low profile on these trips, or at least as low as someone making a video on an inner-city rapid transit line can look.
Welcome aboard Green Line 9. Oak Park is next. In the direction of travel, doors open on the left at Oak Park.
Apologies for the rainy windows. The wind hadn't yet kicked up enough to blow dry our train. At this point in the trip, we've already passed by the former at-grade station of Marion, which would have been to our right and below track level. We passed by Metra's Oak Park station prior to calling on the Green Line's same name station. These stations up to and including Central were constructed in the early 1960s during the project that moved the Lake Branch onto the freight and commuter rail embankment. They've been slightly modernized over the years, but not yet reconstructed.
Richland is next. Doors open on the left at Richland. Smoking, littering, and eating are prohibited on CTA vehicles.
In 1993, the Green Line took on its current pair of destinations. Trains continue south around the loop and onto the south side elevated, splitting into two branches and destinations. But from 1969 to 1993, Lake Street trains ran onto the Dan Ryan branch, and Northwest Elevated trains, now part of the Red and Purple lines, continued on to the South Side Elevated.
Austin is next. Doors open on the left at Austin. Soliciting and gambling are prohibited on CTA vehicles.
We're riding beyond where the line would have briefly in its history converged with the Randolph Street branch. The initial routing of the line in its first year of running to Oak Park via the at-grade alignment. The speed improvement to routing this line onto the embankment in the early 60s likely saved the line from budget cuts.
Doors open on the left at Central. Priority seating is intended for the elderly and passengers with disabilities. Your cooperation is requested.
The capability of the line to be a timely commuter to West Side neighborhoods was better staged to compete with personal vehicles over modern decades. The at-grade portion would have mostly run alongside the embankment, cutting into neighborhood space.
Laramie is next. Doors open on the right at Laramie. Standing passengers, please do not lean against the doors.
The project was an early example of structuring both a more future-proof mass transit option, along with balancing funding across multiple agencies, city, county, and national, that is now commonplace in America. The curve from embankment to elevated has been made softer over the years, while Laramie Station up ahead remains structurally more complex than many stations on the elevated line ahead.
Cicero is next. Doors open on the left at Cicero.
These are low-income neighborhoods, but they are several degrees more viable for redevelopment in the decades to come. The Lake Branch stitches together elements fractured by the trials of time. Tracks sit stately above the street, closer to neighborhoods than the expressway-laden Congress branch of the Blue Line, but still out of conflict with vehicles. There's coexistence of modes of transit and proximity to the more dense and wealthy North Side.
Doors open on the right at Hennessy. Doors open on the right at California. Please be considerate when talking to your phone. Listening to electronic devices. Source not disturbed.
The transition of the Lake Branch from a suburb like Oak Park into Chicago proper, it feels like a trip into urban limbo. Open plots of land with leftover foundations from past industrial sites, split up blocks. Density here is medium at best. From the gentrified retail stores nearby Harlem to the rapidly redeveloping downtown zone, the Lake Branch of the Green Line has plenty going for it, but holds its own with subtlety. Even the newest station at Damon is evidence of that. A useful structure of brutalist convenience, but with plenty of glass to see its understated neighborhood still holding on. Where the lake meets the former Met elevated line at Paulina is where another degree of West Side transit history remains, albeit an echo of its former self. The Lake Street transfer station may be long gone, but the extant Met line remains active as the Pink line to the south. We'll alight here at Ashland and make the transfer over to catch a train back south and west on the Pink line in a future video. That line, stitched together from several past branches, will continue our look at the subtly varied blending of lives presently calling Chicago's West Side home among these L trains. Next week's going to begin a couple of Cleveland videos, with a ride on RTA's light rail on the former interurban and streetcar lines to Shaker Heights. Like and subscribe to see those videos and everything that's to come in the future. I'll see you next time.